Complications of cataract surgery. Preoperative complications. As with any surgery, there could be anxiety, and for anxiety, usually a dose of diazepam is given at bedtime. There could be nausea and gastritis due to some preoperative medications like acetazolamide or glycerol. And if such things happen, we need to stop the medicines and instead we have to give antacid. There could be allergic conjunctivitis or some irritative conjunctivitis. This can happen because of the use of topical medicines. Then there could be some corneal abrasion due to certain procedures done. And fifth is complications due to local anesthesia. Preoperative complications. In this, we have these complications during anesthesia. In complications during anesthesia, we have retrobulbar hemorrhage, oculocardiac reflex, globe perforation, subconjunctival hemorrhage, and spontaneous dislocation of the lens. Out of all these five, subconjunctival hemorrhage and chemosis is very common. About other types, I'll be discussing about it in the later slides. Retrobulbar hemorrhage, it used to happen in earlier times with the retrobulbar block. Nowadays, for SICS, we give peribulbar block, and for phaco, we usually give topical block or we give peribulbar block. So in this retrobulbar hemorrhage, there is a collection of blood in the orbital spaces, resulting in the proptosis, tightness of the lids, chemosis, and as you can see here in the picture, there is a subconjunctival hemorrhage all around the cornea. So here we need to put 2% pilocarpine miotic drops followed by pressure bandage, and in some cases we need to do lateral canthotomy. So this is a picture of retrobulbar hemorrhage which happens due to accumulation of blood in the orbital spaces when retrobulbar block is given. Second one is the posterior dislocation of the lens. Now this happens when there is a weak zonule, weak degenerating zonules associated with a hypermature cataract. In this case, when we give ocular massage, they tend to dislocate spontaneously in the vitreous. Now once they have dislocated, it has to be taken up uh, by the retinal surgeon. They will do pars plana vitrectomy and they will take away the lens from the vitreous and place scleral fixated IOL, and this is how it is managed. So there's a retrobulbar hemorrhage or there could be a posterior dislocation of the lens. Oculocardiac reflex. It is a emergency situation. It results due to trigeminovagal reflex. So trigeminal nerve is involved and the vagus nerve is involved. So here I'm showing the reflex arc. The receptor is the traction on the extraocular muscles like mainly medial rectus muscle. There could be pressure on the globe or any stimulation of the orbital content, even periosteum, can set up the signal, which is being carried via short and long ciliary nerve. Then it goes to ciliary ganglion, then the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve, and finally to the sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve in the fourth ventricle. Integration center is the medulla. From there, efferent branches arise via vagus nerve to the heart. And in the heart, it causes bradycardia, AV block, ventricular ectopy, asystole. So this is an emergency situation and it needs to be managed by IV injection of atropine. Fourth is the perforation of the globe. In this case, if there's a perforation of the globe, there will be hypotony. If you do digital, if you try to check for the digital pressure of the eyeball, you feel hypotony. There will be poor red reflex and vitreous hemorrhage could be seen. This is managed by doing cryopexy or photocoagulation. The fifth one is the subconjunctival hemorrhage. In this picture, second picture, the subconjunctival hemorrhage has been shown. It is a very minor complication and quite frequently seen, and it resolves on its own. You can either proceed with the surgery, or if you feel it is a risk, then you can postpone the surgery. Now, after preoperative complications, there can be certain complications which can happen intraoperatively. So one is superior rectus laceration. This usually happens when we are taking the bridal suture. That it is not a serious thing and it can be managed. The surgery can be um, carried forward. Second is excessive bleeding during peritomy or when incision is being made on the sclera. Third is incision-related complications. Now, while making incision on the sclera, there can be irregular incision due to the use of blunt instruments. There could be buttonholing of the anterior wall of the tunnel. Now, when the buttonholing of the tunnel happens, we have to abandon that particular plane and we have to restart fresh from a deeper plane from the other side. There could be premature entering in the anterior chamber. The premature entering happens when we have gone to the deeper plane, when we are making tunnel at a deeper plane, and suddenly the keratome enters the anterior chamber. So here also we need to abandon that plane and we have to start little superficially in a different plane from the opposite end. Scleral disinsertion. This happens when there is a deep incision made on the sclera resulting in the through and through tear of the sclera. That needs to be sutured and the surgery needs to be postponed. Fourth is the corneal injury resulting in the Descemet's membrane detachment. Now Descemet membrane doesn't regrow, so it needs to be preserved. So we have to take care of the detached Descemet membrane, and at the end of the surgery we have to ensure that it gets attached back to the endothelium with the help of an air bubble. Fifth one is the iris injury or iridodialysis. It can happen due to the use of blunt instruments or sometimes it can happen accidentally. Sixth one is the complications related to capsular rhexis. Small rhexis, it predisposes to PCR, which is a posterior capsular rent and is a dreaded complication followed by nucleus drop. Second one is a very large rhexis. If the rhexis is a large one, then putting the IOL in the bag would be a problem. Third one is the eccentric rhexis, which may cause IOL decentration later on. And rhexis cape or run, in which while making the rhexis it tends to run away towards the equator or maybe it will extend to the posterior capsule and again it predisposes to PCR, posterior capsular rent, and there could be a loss of vitreous also. Seventh one is a PCR, which is a posterior capsular rent. This is again a dreaded complication because once PCR happens, means posterior capsular rent happens, there could be a vitreous loss, there could be a lens drop, IOL drop, anything can happen. So this is one complication which we want to avoid. Eighth one is the nucleus or the IOL drop into vitreous. Now this can happen either during rhexis, hydrodissection, instrumentation, cortical wash. So this will happen only when there is a posterior capsular rent or there is a complete zonular dehiscence. Ninth is the zonular dehiscence. Now we all know that lens is attached to the choroid by means of zonules, ciliary body by means of zonules. Now, sometimes in certain cases, these zonules are weak. So little manipulation and the zonules tear. Normally, if it tears in a small section, in a small area, in some clock areas, it is fine. We can continue with the surgery. But when there's a complete zonular dehiscence, the whole lens can get into vitreous, can get dislocated into the vitreous. So this is again a dreaded complication. 10th is the vitreous loss. 11th is the expulsive choroidal hemorrhage. Now coming to the vitreous loss during surgery. Vitreous loss usually happens when there is a PCR, means posterior capsular rent. So it should not happen. We need to have hypotony, minimal hypotony while operating. So we need to have a low intraocular pressure when we are operating. That can be achieved only when we give the patient some prophylactic dose of drug like 20% mannitol before surgery or the glycerol or acetazolamide, or when we do ocular massage after anesthesia, after peribulbar block, we tend to lower the pressure of the eye, which helps when we are doing surgery. Um, but if it happens, if the posterior capsular rent happens and there is a vitreous loss in the anterior chamber, we need to clear the vitreous from the anterior chamber. Now, this is done by anterior vitrectomy. So vitrectomy is of two types: anterior vitrectomy and posterior vitrectomy. Anterior vitrectomy is done when there is a vitreous loss, or when there is a vitreous prolapse into the anterior chamber and it needs to be removed. And this, after anterior vitrectomy, we need to do the cortical cleanup of the remaining lens matter so that further reaction in the anterior chamber doesn't happen and the cornea remains clear, so that later on when the case is taken up by the retinal surgeon for the secondary placement of the IOL, or by the same surgeon for the secondary placement of the IOL, it can be done easily. This nucleus drop or nuclear fragment drop or IOL drop happens when there is a PCR, when there's a posterior capsular rent. Now, when this happens, it needs to be removed out by doing pars plana vitrectomy and removal of the nucleus or the nuclear fragment or the IOL if it has dislocated into the vitreous by the retinal surgeon. So here in this picture you see there are three ports which are being made at the pars plana level, and through these three ports, one port is for the endoilluminator light, second port is for the infusion cannula for saline, and third port is for the vitrector machine. Now with the help of these three ports, the nucleus matter is cut and removed out by the retinal surgeon. So basically for nucleus drop, we need to do pars plana vitrectomy followed by removal of the nuclear fragments or IOL. Expulsive choroidal hemorrhage. It usually occurs in hypertensive patients. It is characterized by spontaneous gaping of the wound, followed by expulsion of the intraocular contents like lens, vitreous, retina, choroid, UV tissue, blood, etc. Now, management is suprachoroidal blood drainage is done by sclerotomy, wherein a small hole is made in the sclera and suprachoroidal blood is being drained, but it usually ends up in evisceration of the eyeball. So here in the picture, evisceration of the eye. So here in the picture, you can see intraocular contents coming out. This picture, the surgery that has been done here is keratoplasty, in which the cornea of the recipient has been removed, and which has been followed by the removal or expulsion of the lens, uveal tissue, the black thing you see here is the uveal tissue. So this is what is happening here is expulsive choroidal hemorrhage. So it's a dreaded complication and it ends up in evisceration. Now coming to the uh, early post-operative complications. In early post-operative complications, there can be hyphema, which is collection of the blood in the anterior chamber. There can be iris prolapse, in which a piece of the iris is tucked at the site of the wound in the incision area. There could be striate keratopathy, which happens due to the loss of the endothelial cells while doing surgery, followed by corneal edema and folds in descemet membrane. There could be flat anterior chamber next day. Then there could be post-operative anterior uveitis. There could be toxic anterior shock syndrome, and there could be a bacterial endophthalmitis, which is again a dreaded complication. Here, this picture which is being shown here is a case of hyphema, which is collection of blood in the anterior chamber. Now, the source of blood is usually the conjunctival vessel or the scleral vessel, which are being torn while we are making incision of the sclera, or while we are doing peritomy. Blood seeps through the incision into the anterior chamber and collects at the bottom. So this is hyphema here. So a small hyphema, nothing to worry, it gets absorbed. But if it is a large hyphema, it can cause a rise in the intraocular pressure, which needs to be managed. So we usually say, ask the patient to keep the head end elevated, and we ask the patient to take acetazolamide tablet to reduce the pressure. And if it persists for more than 1 week, we have to do paracentesis, wherein we make a small incision in the anterior chamber and drain out the blood. It needs to be done because we don't want the endothelium to be stained with the blood. So hyphema for a long time, persistent hyphema can cause endothelial staining of the cornea. Now this picture here shows iris prolapse. You can see at the site of incision, there is a black tissue which is stuck here. This is the prolapsed iris. You can see the pupil which is updrawn. This is the iris prolapse picture. It usually happens when the suturing of the incision is inadequate. Uh, Most frequently, it follows inappropriate management of the vitreous loss. Now, treatment is usually excision of the prolapsed tissue and resuturing the incision. Now, if the iris prolapse is less than 24 hours, we just need to reposit the iris tissue back into the anterior chamber and suture the wound. But if it is more than 24 hours, we need to abscise, we need to cut away the prolapsed iris tissue followed by suturing of the wound. Now this picture shows here striate keratopathy, which is again early post-operative complication of a cataract surgery. Normally this happens due to some endothelial loss while doing surgery. So as we all know, endothelial cells they don't regenerate. So once endothelial cells are lost, this will be followed by some edema. So if there's a mild corneal edema, there will be some descendant membrane fold also, and such condition is called striate keratopathy. Here in the picture you can see there's a swelling of the cornea, there's edema of the cornea. There are fine lines here and there, which are nothing but decimate folds. So this is a case of striate keratopathy. Now, mild cases they resolve spontaneously, and few cases they may need hyperosmotic agents like hypertonic agents like sodium chloride and all. But if it persists, later on it can lead to a dreaded condition which is called PBK, pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, for which later on we may have to do penetrating keratoplasty. This is a case of post-operative anti-uveitis, which is again a common complication of early post-operative complication of cataract surgery. Um, it can happen due to instrumental trauma, undue healing of uveal tissue, undue handling of uveal tissue. It can also happen due to the reaction due to the residual cortex, or due to certain use of chemicals like viscoelastics, pilocarpine, etc. while operating. So here in the picture you can see the reaction. Here you can see there are multiple KPs here, keratic precipitates. So this is managed by putting a frequent instillation of steroid drops or ointment. Uh, it can be differentiated from endophthalmitis because the red glow will be a brighter here. In endophthalmitis we see an altered glow, and but if symptoms worsen in the next 6 to 12 hours, then it has to be thought of as endophthalmitis, which is a dreaded complication. Endophthalmitis is one of the most dangerous complication which we see in early post-operative complications. The incidence in the operated cases is 0.2 to 0.5%. Source of infection can be contaminated solution like a viscoelastic substance, or it could be Ringer's lactate solution. Then contaminated instruments, contaminated surgeon's hands, patient's own flora from conjunctiva or eyelids. Symptoms and signs. So usually there will be pain, ocular pain, there will be diminished vision, circumcorneal congestion, chemosis, there could be exudates in the anterior chamber, corneal edema would be there, lid edema would be there, and the glow, the red glow would be altered. So we call it as an altered red glow. So these are the basic symptoms and signs of the endophthalmitis. Um, So here in this picture, it's a case of endophthalmitis, early post-operative. It's an early post-operative complication here, so it will be an acute endophthalmitis. So here you can see there is a hypopyon at the bottom of the anterior chamber, and there is congestion in the conjunctiva. So any such finding, even AC exudates, any such finding post-operatively should always click as endophthalmitis unless proven otherwise. So the source of the causative organisms are usually the Staph epidermidis, Staph aureus, and Pseudomonas species. Uh, this endophthalmitis, basically it will be dealt with in uvea chapter. Here I'm just dealing with the acute endophthalmitis. Now, endophthalmitis. Endophthalmitis is defined as an inflammation of the inner structure of the eyeball, that is uveal tissue and retina, associated with pouring of exudates in the vitreous cavity anterior chamber, and posterior chamber. Now, this needs to be differentiated from panophthalmitis. Panophthalmitis is intense purulent inflammation of the whole eyeball, including the Tenon's capsule. So, the management is very important here. Early diagnosis and recognition of this condition, and management and aggressive management is very important in case of endophthalmitis. So, it is basically managed by giving intravitreal injections or by doing vitrectomy. So here, if there's a patient, if there's a case of endophthalmitis, we have to take we have to take the vitreous tap and aqua samples for culture and sensitivity. So we do it from the vitreous. We go through the 20 at the pars plana area, through the pars plana area, and we take the vitreous sample, and we also collect the aqua sample and send it for the bacteriological examination. Um, Followed by this, we have to give intravitreal injections. So normally we want to cover both gram positive and gram negative at this point of time. So we give vancomycin intravitreal injection along with amikacin intravitreal injection. Now there can be a change of combination here, but usually vancomycin with amikacin or vancomycin with some ceftazidime or something like that is given in a fixed dose. Now, after giving the intravitreal injections, this is also along with the intravitreal injections, we need to give topical fortified preparation of vancomycin and either ceftazidime or amikacin, and along with that, we need to give systemic antibiotics also. So we wait for 2 days. If there is improvement, we need to repeat the intravitreal injections. If there is deterioration and the or if the visual acuity is PL or hand movement close to face, we need to go ahead and do vitrectomy, pars plana vitrectomy, in which we remove the vitreous from the eyeball so that the load of infection is reduced. So this is a basic management of endophthalmitis which we do. Now coming to the last segment, which is late post-operative complications. In the late post-operative complications, we can get cystoid macular edema, pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, retinal detachment, after cataract or posterior capsular opacification, delayed chronic post-operative endophthalmitis. Now coming to cystoid macular edema, it is fluid collection in the cystic loculi in the Henle's layer of macula. It can be visually significant or it can be visually insignificant. If it is visually insignificant, it means some small fluid has collected which will get absorbed over a period of time. So we just need to wait and watch. But if it is visually significant, this means if you see it, if you do the fundoscopy, honeycomb appearance of the macula would be seen. If we go ahead and do fundus fluorescein angiography, FFA, we see a flower petal appearance of the dye around the fovea. So here in the second picture, this black and white picture, you see there is a fovea surrounding by a petaloid appearance of the dye. So the dye has gone inside the loculi, and this is giving us a petal-like appearance. So this is a cystoid macular edema. The diagnosis gets confirmed. If you see the first picture, which is OCT, it's a cross section at the fovea, at the macula. You see some loculi here. See, there are multiple loculi here. These loculi are filled with the fluid. So this again confirms the finding that it is a case of cystoid macular edema. Now, why do we get cystoid macular edema? We get cystoid macular edema usually in cases of some complications like PCR, posterior capsular rent. If there's a posterior capsular rent, there will be some vitreous prolapse, and vitreous may go into the wound and gets incarcerated there. It can get stuck there. So as it is stuck there, it will cause some traction at the macula, leading to some physiological change at the fovea and causing cystoid macular edema. So the management is we have to clear the anterior chamber of vitreous. So anterior vitrectomy is done to clear the vitreous in the anterior chamber. We need to put the patient on steroids and also give patient antiprostaglandins. Now antiprostaglandins are given because prostaglandins are also said to have some role in cystoid macular edema. So this is cystoid macular edema. Now coming to the pseudophakic bullous keratopathy. As I have mentioned earlier, in the early post-operative complications, we see striate keratopathy. Now this is if the steroid keratopathy persists and if it is of severe type, it leads later on to pseudophakic bullous keratopathy. So here we see, you can see in the picture there's a haziness of the cornea. You can see some epithelial bullae also. So there will be some epithelial bullae, which is nothing but epithelial edema. There will be stromal edema, and the patient will complain of blurry vision more so in the morning, which will improve later in the day. Um this chronic edema, it can lead to scarring, and if the epithelial bullae ruptures, it will cause severe pain to the patient. So patient will usually complain of vision problem and pain in the eye. Uh, the cause of pseudophakic bullous keratopathy. So usually some endothelial cells would have lost, significant amount of endothelial cells would have lost in the surgery, which led to this pseudophakic, first to striate keratopathy followed by pseudophakic bullous keratopathy, or the patient could be having already some existing pathology in the endothelium like Fuchs endothelial dystrophy, which was not diagnosed prior to surgery and which led to this condition later on. Or there could be some chronic inflammation going on leading to the cell loss. So the basic pathology is the loss of endothelial cells, which lead to pseudophakic bullous keratopathy later on. So the management is basically symptomatic. We give hypertonic agents, sodium chloride and all, along with bandage contact lens. So this is done to alleviate the pain. It doesn't bring about much improvement in the vision. And the final treatment is actually penetrating keratoplasty. One of the late post-operative complication can be retinal detachment if the patient would have had some risk factors. One of the risk factor is having a peripheral lattice degeneration. Now, at the place where the retina attaches to the choroid, that area, sometimes we see some degenerative changes, and one of the degenerative change is the lattice degeneration. So these are the these are the weak areas of attachment of the retina to the choroid. Now, if it would have been diagnosed earlier, we need to seal the lattice degeneration by laser. But if it would have not been diagnosed, then this can be a risk factor for retinal detachment later on in life. Second, very common risk factor is again PCR, posterior capsular rent, because posterior capsular rent will be followed by some vitreous loss or vitreous prolapse. If there's a vitreous prolapse, it will cause traction on the retina, and if the traction is severe enough, it can cause retinal detachment later on. So these are the risk factors, and this retinal detachment is again an emergency situation which needs to be managed immediately. So after cataract or secondary cataract, now it is one of the most common complication of late is one of the most common late post-operative complications of cataract surgery, in which the posterior capsule becomes opaque. So the causes are usually some remnant lens matter would have been left in the capsule, which gets trapped, resulting in the opacification. Or there could be remnant anterior epithelial cells which proliferate and lead to the opacification. So clinically, we see three kinds of after cataract. One is dense membranous after cataract. So here the whole of the posterior capsule will become opacified. So this is one type which has not been okay. This is one type, dense membranous after cataract. I think the second picture showing here is the dense membranous after cataract of the posterior capsule. Second one is the Somring's ring, in which the anterior epithelial cells get trapped between the anterior capsular rim and the posterior capsule, and they proliferate and form a ring-like opacity, which is called as Somring's ring. So in this slide, I don't have this Somring's ring picture. I have this dense membranous after cataract, which is the second picture. And third one is the Eschnick's pearl, in which vacuolated subcapsular epithelial cells are seen. So here in the first picture, you see soap-like bubbles in the posterior capsule, and you see this in the retroillumination on slit lamp. So this is the retroillumination seen against retroillumination. These are tiny, tiny pearl-like things, and these are called as Eschnick's pearl. So there are three types: dense membranous type, Somring's ring, and Eschnick's pearl. So this is a very common complication which we see after cataract. So a better picture here. The first one is the Eschenich pearls. These tiny, tiny drop like structure seen, opacification seen here in the posterior capsule. And here you see is a membranous fibrous proliferation, which is membranous type of after cataract, dense membranous type of after cataract. IOL related complications. So one of the IOL related complication is cystoid macular edema, which is called Irwin-Cass syndrome, which I have already spoken about. Second is the corneal endothelial damage, uveitis, glaucoma. Now, endothelial damage usually used to happen with the AC IOL, anterior chamber IOL. Third is uveitis, glaucoma, hyphema or UGH syndrome. This was also more associated with the anterior chamber IOL because the IOL was used to be kept in the anterior chamber. It used to rub against the endothelium, causing endothelial damage. It used to obstruct in the flow of the aqueous humor, causing glaucoma and all. So these are all more related to anterior chamber IOL. Fourth is a malposition of IOL. So we have some names here like sunset syndrome. When there is inferior subluxation of the IOL, it is called sunset syndrome. When there is superior subluxation of IOL, it is called as sunrise syndrome. Lost lens syndrome. Here the IOL gets dislocated in the vitreous, resulting in the lost lens syndrome. Windshield wiper syndrome. Here, if a small lens is placed in the ciliary sulcus, not in the bag, ciliary sulcus, then though that small lens, the superior haptic of the small lens, if it is vertical, it tends to move left and right with the movement of the head. So this is called as windshield wiper syndrome. The fifth one is the pupillary capture of the IOL. So normally IOL is kept in the bag or it can be kept in the sulcus just in front of the anterior rim of the capsule. But sometimes what happens, a part of the optic, IOL has two parts, haptic and optic. So when a part of the haptic comes in front of the iris, that condition is called as pupillary capture of IOL. I have a picture in which I can show the pupillary capture of IOL. And the last one is a toxic lens syndrome. Sometimes the lens is made up of such material which can elicit uveitis which can elicit uveitis. So that needs to be differentiated from endophthalmitis and needs to be managed with steroid. So this is toxic lens syndrome. This picture here shows the superior subluxation of the IOL. This is a sunrise syndrome. You can see the pupil and here a part of the IOL can be seen. Second one is a sunset syndrome where you can see inferior subluxation of the IOL and hence it is called as sunset syndrome. This picture, the first picture here shows IOL decentration. So it can happen if one haptic is inserted into the sulcus and the other into the bag. So this needs to be removed and replaced again. The second one is the optic capture, which I was talking about. Here you can see a part of the optic is resting on the iris. So this is optic capture of the pupil. So again here we need to reposition the lens in the bag or in the sulcus. So one of the late complications can also be epithelial ingrowth. Here what happens, there is a proliferation of conjunctival epithelial cells and they invade anterior chamber through the defect in the incision or the wound. So there is an abnormal epithelial membrane which proliferates and covers the endothelium, trabecular meshwork, iris and anterior vitreous later on. So when this abnormal membrane is formed on the trabecular meshwork, it can lead to glaucoma. So this again is a complication, epithelial ingrowth. Here in the picture you can see there was an incision site here and you can see some whitish thing here. This is an epithelial ingrowth. We usually this used to be seen in cases of in case post-op as a post-operative complication of keratoplasty also. Thank you.